Good morning, everybody. Hope you are well. We are we are going to have a look at the beginning of the parsha, the beginning of Parshas Chayei Sarah, and the what's going on at the beginning is that Sarah has passed away. She's 127 years old. She was 127 years old, and Avram Avinu needs to find a burial place for his beloved wife. And he gets into a negotiation with a fellow called Ephron. And at the end of the day, to cut a long story short, he has to end up paying 400 shekel for this burial place, which is an exorbitant amount of money. He, in colloquial English, he's been ripped off, but he buys this field from Ephron, what we now know as Machpelah in Hebron, and he has a burial place for his wife. That is the gist of Rishon, and we're going to see that this was one of his 10 tests. We know that Avram Avinu was given 10 tests, and this was the last of the 10 tests. Why was it a test? Because Avram Avinu had been promised the entire land by Hashem just previously, and now he's got to get into detailed negotiations to buy a simple burial place for his beloved wife, and yet he doesn't complain. So let's see what what we can learn from these few psukim. Chapter 23, verse 1, page 106 in the Art Scroll. The life of Sarah was 100 years and 20 years, v'sheva shonim, and 7 years. Shnei Chayei Sarah. These are the years of the life of Sarah. And immediately we'll notice that there seems to be too many words in this verse. Chapter 23, verse 1 in Genesis and Bereshis, it should just say that these are the years of Sarah's life, 127 years. Why does it say 100 years, 20 years, 7 years? These are the years of the life of Sarah. It seems to be not what we expect from the Torah, that's normally so careful not to write extra words. So Rashi picks up immediately, and he says that when she was 20, when she was 100, she was like 20 without sin, and when she was 20, and when she was 20, she was like 7 for beauty. So therefore, Rashi says it repeats the word Shana each time to teach us something about Sarah. But what we're going to focus on is the second Rashi. When Rashi says Shnei Chayei Sarah, why does it repeat that these are the years of the life of Sarah? To tell you, Kulon Shovin Latova. They were all equal Latova for good. In other words, she was consistently a good woman doing what Hashem wanted for her. So let's start off with the first question. Rav Moshe Avigdor Amiel Zatzal points out that this parasha is talking about the death of Sarah, and yet it's called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, which is not really true. We don't know. We do not discuss her life at all. We discuss what happens after she passes away. We find the same thing in Parshas Vayichi, which talks about the death of Yaakov Avinu, and it's called Vayichi Yaakov, and Yaakov lived. And yet the main information given to us there is that he died. So Rav Amiel points out this is due to the Gemara in Brachos 18 that says Tzadikim b'misoson kroim chaim, that righteous people, even after they pass away, are still called alive. Why is that? Because we're still learning from them either from their written Torah or from their oral Torah or from their acts. And therefore, since we are still learning from them, their physical body might not be here, but their spiritual body is here. And therefore, the Gemara says, Sadiqim misos and Kurin Chaim, that righteous people, even when they pass away, they're called alive. And that's why it's called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, even though it's mainly it's discussing her death, because she was a righteous person. And therefore, since we are still thousands of years later learning about Sarah, talking about Sarah, what a great woman she was and what we can learn from her, and therefore it's merely a physical death, it's not a spiritual death. And in that vein, the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, as only the Vilna Gaon can, he notes that the combination of the words death and burial are found 7 times in this parasha. He died, buried and died, or died and buried 7 times. And the Gra explains that in all of them, the word for burial is mentioned before the word for death, with the exception of one. So 6 times we have burial followed by death, and once we have death followed by burial. Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the burial of Sarah Imenu. So the Gra explains the following. The Gra explains that why was Avram Avinu so keen to buy this double cave, this Ma'arat Machpelah in this field? He was keen because he knew that Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, were buried in this cave. And this cave had special spiritual properties. And therefore he also knew that 3 other pairs were going to be buried there. Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. So therefore you have 6 burials there. 6 people are going to be buried. And these extra 6 people, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah, were tzaddikim. And therefore, as the Gemara says, tzaddikim, even though they die, they're still alive. So therefore their burial is mentioned before death. Because when it comes to a tzaddik, they only really die a moment before the resurrection of the dead. So first they're buried, and then they die a moment before the resurrection of the dead. So therefore 6 times it mentions burial and then death. But we know there was one other part of a person that's also buried in Ma'arat Machpelah. And what's that? That's the head of Esav. Esav was certainly no tzaddik. So therefore, out of these 7 times, once it mentions death followed by burial. And the idea is this idea that righteous people, tzaddikim, are not dead. Tzaddikim are not dead even though their body may have expired. And why is that? Because of what we learned. Somebody once said that somebody only dies when we stop speaking about them. And we are still speaking about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, thousands of years afterwards. Thousands of years afterwards. So they're not dead. Their lessons, their messages, their leadership is still with us. And therefore, it writes burial and only then mentions death on 6 occasions relating to those 6 holy people, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah, who are going to be buried in Ma'arat Machpelah, which is the subject matter of this parasha. And once it mentions death before burial, because that's talking about the head of Esav. So that's the Vilna Gaon carrying on with this idea of tzaddikim, even though they may be physically dead, they're still alive. And finally, the Ksaf Sof explains that when Abraham wants to purchase the cave, he says, "Ve'ekbirah meisi melefonai," I will bury my dead from in front of me. That is in verse 13. By Dabel Ephron ba'oznei Amoritz leimor, and Abraham spoke to Ephron in the ears of the people, saying, "Ach im atolu shmeini, please listen to me. Nasati kesef asoda, I've paid for the field. Kach mimeni, take the money. Ve'ekbirah es mesi." Oh, Shoma, sorry, sorry. Here you go. I beg your pardon. In verse 4, I'm a stranger, I'm also a dweller amongst you. Give me a portion to bury amongst you, that brought me see milfonai, and I will bury my dead milfonai from before me. What does milfonai from before me mean? Milfonai means that all I'm going to remove from before me is the physical corpse. But the spiritual, the neshama, the lessons, the leadership, everything that we can take from that person, that remains with me. But as we all may see, I will just bury my dead, the physical, minafonai from before me. But the spiritual continues. So that is really, as an introduction, this idea that righteous people remain alive. If you, on YouTube, there's a few clips of Rav Soloveitchik, the Rav, giving a shir. Many of them are in Yiddish with English subtitles, but I think one of them is in English. And there, the Rav is explaining, he was asked, how is it possible for him to give a Gemara shir to boys from a different generation? He is an old man, quote unquote. What does he possibly have in connection with these boys? And he says when he starts giving his shir, suddenly there's a knock at the door, and in walks the Rambam, and in walks Chaim Brisker, and in walks Rashi, and in walks the Tosfos. And he explains that when he's giving the shir and all of this becomes alive, so these boys see who, I mean, this is such poetry that he's speaking. They see that these people are alive. They see that they're not dead. That Rashi is as alive and relevant today as he was in 1066 or in the 11th century when he lived. So therefore, excuse me. So therefore, that's the idea, that when we talk about these people, when we learn from these people, they are still alive, and that's why it's Chayei Sarah. It's interesting to note in the first verse, it says, let's look at it together. Vayiyu Chayei Sarah. These are the years of the life of Sarah. Me'ar Shana, 100 year. Shana is singular. The Esrim Shana, and 20 year Shana is singular. The Sheva Shanim is 7 years. With the large numbers, the word for year that follows them is in the singular, 100, 20, and 7, which is a small number, is, and 7, which is a small number, is written with the shana, which is plural. So therefore, that's the question: why the big numbers in the word shana is in the singular, and the small number is in the singular? So the Zohar says something very interesting. The Zohar says, and the reason is because people who make themselves large and important and chushev in this world, and that's what they feel about themselves, are katan, are small in the world to come. But people who are small in this world and realize that as much as we know and as much as we have achieved, there's so much more to learn and so much more to do, and they make themselves small in this world, are large in the world to come. The importance of humility. And therefore, 100, which is a large number, shana, only has a small word after it in the singular. 20, which is a large number, only has a shana, only has a small number after it, the word year in singular. But 7, which is small, has shanim, a large number, reflecting this idea of the Zohar, that humility is the key. Excuse me. Humility is the key. That if people think that they're great, and people think that they've achieved, and people think that they are God's gift too, then in reality, they are katan. But people, and you see this, that great people never feel themselves to be anything special. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the great of the greatest. I had the privilege of, as a young boy, meeting him on a few occasions. When he used to walk into a hall and everybody stood up, he would immediately tell everybody to sit down, and they started singing songs in his honor. He would immediately tell them to be quiet, because he understood, and he was the greatest of the great. So therefore, that's what it is. Those who think they are great are small. Those who think they are small are great. And that's reflected in the fact that the large numbers have the word shana in the singular, and the small number has the word shanim. And the Imre Emes quotes his great-grandfather, the Chidushei Harim, who notes that one of the 13 principles of exegesis, the ways that we learn things out from the written law in the oral law, is something called ein miut achamiut el rabus. If a posuk, if a verse, has two words which exclude, then they come to include. As with two minuses make a plus. An example would be in the Gemara in Makos. Excuse me. The Gemara in Makos 9a asks the following question. The Gemara in Makos is talking about somebody who kills inadvertently by accident, has to run away, has to flee to a city of refuge, an Ir Miklat. And the question is, if somebody who is visually challenged and they kill by accident, do they have to run away to a city of refuge? And one opinion is no, they don't, because the verse that says that you have to run away if you kill accidentally says below Ra'os if you don't see, meaning if you don't see in that instance. But if you never see, then you wouldn't have to run away to a city of refuge. However, Rebbe Meir, I believe, Rebbe Meir says they do. Why? Because that verse says Beli Ra'os, without seeing, which excludes somebody who sees the victim coming towards him. And in the same verse, it says Bivli Das, and he kills him unintentionally, which would exclude somebody who kills intentionally. So you've got two exclusions. Two exclusions means it comes also to include something. What does it come to include? That somebody who's visually impaired, visually challenged, would also go to the city of refuge. So you see, when a pasuk has two words which exclude something, it must also include. Because if you have two exclusions, one after the other, it comes to include. And that was an example. Ask the Chidushei Harim, I don't understand. If the Torah wants to include something, so just include it. Why are we being taught to include something through the mechanism of having two exclusions? Why doesn't the Torah just write, why doesn't God just write the inclusion? So in our case, it would be that somebody who can't see goes to the city of refuge. Why, according to Rebbe Meir, would you need to have two exclusions to tell us it includes something? What does it include? Includes something. Why? So he also reverts to this idea. And the idea is, if you want to include, if you want to be expansive, if you want to be great, then the way to achieve that is to exclude, to be small, not to be expansive. And that's what the Torah is teaching us, that only through the mechanism of exclusion, meaning small, can you include, can you expand and be big. And therefore he says that is the same Musa. And that's the Musa that we're beginning here as well. Mea Shona, 100, singular year. 20, Shona, singular year. Sheva, small, Shonim, that is, in fact, which great. So again, it's that message in humility. Andrew of Dun Segel asks, Yafeh Ma'od, everything's lovely. It's a wonderful message in humility. And it's true. Great, really, really great people have this aspect of humility. But why are we being taught that now in connection with the death of Sarah? It's very nice that we have, excuse me, it's very nice that we have a lesson about humility. But why specifically in the death of Sarah? So he relates it to this Rashi. Rashi says, Shnei Chayei Sarah. Why is the verse repeating that these are the years of the life of Sarah after it's told us 127? It says Rashi to teach us, Kulan Shavin Latova. They were all equal for good. They were all years in which Sarah did good. The Torah, she was good. She did good. She listened to God. She followed the Torah, etc., etc. Also, we've done second. How's that possible? We know that if you look at Sarah's life, it wasn't plain sailing at all. She couldn't have children. She had problems with Hagar, problems with Ishmael, the Akedah, which Rashi says eventually the shock of the Akedah killed her. It wasn't plain sailing. She was taken by Paro. She was taken by Avimelech. They had to go down. There was famine. It wasn't plain sailing. So how is it possible, through the trials and tribulations of life, Kulon Shovim Latova, to always be good, if you realize that we are a small part of a bigger, larger picture? And when we realize that we are a small part of a very, very large picture, then we don't get excessively happy with our successes, and we don't get excessively down when life turns against us. Because I'm only a small part. And if we look at the bigger picture, then I'm a tiny, tiny, tiny speck. And therefore, there's no reason to get excessively happy. There's no reason to get excessively sad. There's no reason to say that I can't connect now, or I can connect now. Or rather, if I can't connect or I can connect, there's no reason not to carry on. And therefore, that's the message. When someone is humble, when someone realizes that they're only a small part in an enormous larger picture, then they're able to continue doing good no matter what life throws at them. And yes, everybody experiences pain and good times and bad times, etc., etc. And no one's saying that it's not painful. But not to be able to carry on is not to be able to see the larger picture. And therefore, that's the idea here. How was it that Sarah, with all her trials and tribulations, every year was good? Kulon Shovim Latova, they were all good, because she saw herself as just part of the larger picture. She saw herself as katan. She saw herself as small. And people who have that ability, that humility, that is the essence to greatness. So that is Rashi, Kulon Shovim Latova. That is why the years are written year, and years, etc., etc. The Medrash tells us that the great Rabbi Akiva was once giving a shir, and Medrash tells us that people started nodding off. I mean, as an aside, the great Rabbi Akiva is standing in front of you, giving a shir, and people are nodding off. It's a remarkable concept to try and get ahead of. But that's what the Medrash says. They started nodding off, and he wanted to wake them up. So, in order to wake them up, he quoted a Medrash Rabbah in Noach that asks, why is it that Queen Esther reigned over 127 countries? And the answer is that Esther is a descendant of Sarah, who died at the age of 127, and therefore she reigned over 120 countries. So let's get the picture here. Rabbi Akiva is giving a shir. The people are dozing off. So in order to wake them up, he says, you know what? Why was it that Esther, the great granddaughter, whatever it is, the descendant of Sarah Menu, ruled over 127 countries in the Purim story? The answer is because Sarah lived for 127 years. I mean, I've got to be honest, that wouldn't wake me up. I mean, it might wake me up because I would ask, well, what's the connection? It's such a... Okay, we found 127, and nothing is by accident. Okay, but what is the connection between Sarah living for 127 years, and Esther, her descendant, reigning over 127 countries? So we said in the past that what Rabbi Akiva was saying is 127 countries for 127 years. That means for each year, there was a country, which means for each month, maybe there was a city. And maybe for each week, there was a town. And maybe for each day, there was a street. And maybe for each hour, there was a house. What Rabbi Akiva was saying is that every single moment of Sarah's life had meaning. And that's what he's trying to tell the students who are falling asleep. Every single moment of Sarah's life, she was active, doing something positive. And she had 127 years, and each moment, each year related to a country, each month related to a city, each day or week related to a town, each day related to a street, etc., etc. The connection between the 127 years of Sarah and the 127 cities or countries that Esther ruled over was because every single moment of Sarah's life was filled with meaning, was filled with doing, with action, with positivity. And that related to every moment, every bit of the 127 countries of Esther. And therefore he said, wake up. We can't afford to sleep when we're supposed to be awake. That's what we've said in the past. A different approach is offered by the Yalkut Yehuda. Excuse me. The Yalkut Yehuda says that this is not a literal situation, that the people were sleeping whilst Rabbi Akiva was giving a shir. What it means was that Rabbi Akiva lived at a time, as we well know, under the Roman occupation. And it was oppressive. They weren't allowed to learn, they weren't allowed to keep mitzvahs, and people had been killed by the Romans, and the majority of people were depressed, were down and out, and Rabbi Akiva wanted to wake them up. He wanted to give them something to give them hope for the future. And he says to them, there are 127 countries and 127 years of sorrow. Do you know what that means? That the reward for the 127 years of goodness of Sarah's life was only given to her great, whatever it was, descendant, Esther, many, many years later. And in the meantime, we may have been asking, where is God? Why isn't Sarah being rewarded for 127 years? What's going on here? It doesn't work. It's not true. And it's only many, many years later that we see the 127 being rewarded. And therefore now, true, he says to the people, true, we're going through oppression. True, it's not a good time to be living. However, do not think that there's no point in keeping the Torah. Do not think that we have to give up. Do not think, because even if we may not see it now, we know there is reward for what we do, and maybe it would only be seen many, many years in the future. And that's the connection, says the Yalkut Yehuda, between the 127 years of Esther's of Sarah's life and the 127 years of 127 countries over which Esther ruled. The message is we have to do what we have to do. And we know that we will be rewarded. When? How? Now, later, many years later. We see from Esther, we see from Sarah that was many, many years later. And we mustn't give up in the time in between. That is the Yalkut Yehuda. So let's move on to the second verse. Vatoma Sarah, and Sarah died. But Kiryat Arba, in Kiryat Arba, he Hebron, in Hebron, bears Canaan, the land of Canaan. Vayava Abraham lispod l'Sarah v'livkosa. And Abraham came to give a hesped to Sarah and to cry for her. Rashi tells us that when Sarah, why does Sarah die now? So Rashi tells us that when Sarah heard the news that Yitzchok was almost offered up on an altar in the Akedah, Parcha Nishmasa, her soul flew out of her and she died. The Eish Kodesh, the Klonimus Kalmus Shapira of Piatetzna, the great uncle of Rabbi Shapira of Eish Kodesh down the road, he's writing in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1941, Pashas Chayei Sarah. And he says that after all the trials and tribulations that Sarah endured, what does it mean that she hears that her son is almost offered up and she dies? Maybe I could understand if she heard that Avram had taken Yitzchak and sacrificed him. Maybe I can understand that shock. But when she hears that she's almost sacrificed in the Akedah, why does that kill her? Remember, he's writing in the Warsaw Ghetto, 1941. Says the Eish Kodesh, the Pietzetzner Rebbe, in her death, Sarah was telling HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we, as a Jewish people, can sustain so much pain, but no more. Sarah had experienced so much pain that she died, if you forgive the expression, on something which pales into insignificance considering what she'd been through in her life. Her son almost. What she was saying to Hashem, says the Pietzetzner Rebbe, is we can only take so much and no more. And then he writes, and this is what's going on now, 1941, the Holocaust. We can only take so much pain, we can only take so much death. Even those of us who survive, he writes, are broken. And therefore, he says to Hashem, enough is enough. That the death of Sarah should be an atonement for whatever it needs to be atoned for, and enough is enough. And that's why he writes that Sarah dies when she hears that Yitzchak is almost being offered up, is a message to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the Jewish people have the ability to take so much pain and so much suffering, but no more. It's time to end it. That's what the Eish Kodesh writes. And if you imagine the situation in which he's writing it, it's a very powerful message. So the verse says that Abraham came to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her, but it doesn't say what he says. There's no copy of his eulogy here. The next verse says, and Avram got up from his dead, and he goes to buy a burial plot. So the verse says he comes to give a eulogy, but it doesn't say what it is. Is there an indication in everything that we've been saying, perhaps what the eulogy, what the hesped of Avram Avinu for his beloved wife Sarah was? Says Rav Moshe Sternbuch that the answer is found in that Rashi which we quoted in the previous verse. Rashi says that the verse 1 repeats Shnei Chayei Sarah, the years of the life of Sarah, to tell us Kulon Shovin Latova. They were all consistently good. Says Rav Sternbuch, what does that mean? That means that one of the problems is that we change according to the prevalent morals of society at the time. There are certain moral codes which change given the changing thoughts of society. And there's certain behaviors which are considered okay and moral now, which were not considered moral 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago in society at large. Kulan Shav in the Torah means that rather than being influenced by other people's morals, Sarah influenced other people to the morals of God, to the unchanging morals of the Torah. And that was the hesped of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu stood in front of Sarah, says Rabbi Sternbuch, and says, Kulan Shavim the Tova. Every year was good. And rather than being influenced by what the world at large is doing, Sarah tried to affect and to influence the world at large to the unchanging moral code of the Torah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's what he suggests was the hesped of Avram Avinu for his beloved wife, Sarah. So where does she die? In Pasuk 2 it says, Vatomos Sarah died by Kiryat Arba, and Kiryat Arba, he Chevron. It's Chevron. So the question is asked, so just say she died in Chevron. Why Kiryat Arba, which is Chevron? Just say she died in Chevron. We know today that Kiryat Arba and Chevron is one. There's Kiryat Arba and then there's Chevron. But if you look at Kira Arba, it always says Kira Arba hi Chevron. So just say Chevron. So the Shneis Chaim quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin 46b that says, from the word lispo, there is a discussion in the Gemara whether when we give a hesped, when we give a eulogy, is the eulogy for the benefit of the person who's passed away, or is the eulogy for the benefit of the people who are at the burial ground, who are at the kavur, at the funeral. So they want to bring a proof here that the verse says in verse 2 that Avram came lispod l'sara, to give a hesped l'sara, for the benefit of Sarah. So they want to suggest that it is for the benefit of the deceased and not for the benefit of those who are alive. The problem is that when Sarah died, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Eliezer were all doing the Akedah. That's what we just said. When she hears about the Akedah, she passes away. And therefore, there was nobody around to give a hesped. And the Gemara asks, would they really have waited for Avraham to have come to give a hesped? We know it's very important to bury somebody as quick as possible. Answers the Gemara, yes, they would have waited. Why would they have waited? Because it would have been in Sarah's, had you asked Sarah, she would have said, no, wait for Avraham. Wait for Avraham to come. And therefore, there's no real proof that it's for her or for Avraham, because the reason why it says this Spodla Sarah because we waited for Avraham to come, because Sarah would have wanted that. So there's no proof whether it's for the deceased. Ask the Shneis Chaim, but 1 minute. It's true that Avraham might not have been around when she died. It's true that Yitzchak may not be around, Eliezer may not be around, but Avraham had 3 great tzaddikim as friends. Anna, Eshkon, and Mamre. And they were great tzaddikim, and they surely would have gone to Sarah as soon as they heard the news. And therefore they would have been round her before Avram came. Says the Shneis Chaim, that is why it mentions Kiryat Arba. Beautiful. Every word in the verse has a place. Every word in the pasuk is there. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba. Why are we being told of Kiryat Arba? Because who would have rushed to the scene, if you like? Who would have been the first people to sit with her, to sit with the dead body, to give her that honor? It would have been Anna Eshkon Mamre. Anna Eshkon Mamre. Why is Kiryat Arba called Kiryat Arba? The Kiryat of the 4 people, because the 4 people are Avram, Anna Eshkon Mamre. And therefore, that's why we're being told it's in Kiryat Arba. Because these 3 great tzaddikim ran to be with Sarah and then waited for Avram to join them. And that's how do we know that? From the fact that the verse mentions Kiryat Arba. Every word in the Torah, every letter, everything has to be justified why it's there. So we move on to verse 4. He says, I'm a visitor. I'm also a dweller. Last time we had a lot to say about that. Give me a burial plot with you, and I will bury my dead from in front of me. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. This is I think a very good, important message. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, chapter 5, Mishnah 3, tells us that Avram Avinu endured 10 tests and passed all of them. According to Rabbeinu Yonah, the 9th test was the Akedah, which he says was the most difficult of all. After which God says, now I know that Avram, you are a God-fearing person, because you're willing to offer up your son. The 10th test was having to buy a burial plot for Sarah and having to negotiate and to pay a lot of money, even though God had previously promised him that the whole land was going to belong to him. So that was the 10th test. Would he just go along and buy the field, or would he complain? I don't understand. How could God do this to me? After he promised me the land, I have to pay a fortune for a burial place? That was a test. Was he going to complain or not? He didn't complain and he passed the test. The question is, and what I love about this question is, I've never thought about it, and it's so obvious. If the Akedah was the most difficult of all the tests, and it was number 9, why didn't it stop there? What is the point of having a 10th test, an easier test, after Avram has proved he can pass the difficult test? Avram has proved that he can pass the test of Akedah. So obviously any subsequent test is going to be small fry. It's going to be easy for him to pass. So what is the point? What is the purpose of having a 10th test after the most difficult test of the Akedah? It's a very good question. So Rabbi Tzadok Zoltz, who was the Rav Rashi of Yerushalayim, quotes the Gemara in Avodah Zarah 18a that tells a very interesting story. Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma fell ill, and Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan went to visit him. Then he's not well, he goes to visit him. Rabbi Yossi said, Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma is not well, says to his visitor, I hear that you sit and you teach Torah, and you always have a sefer, and you've built great communities. I'm worried that you and your sefer Torah shouldn't be burnt. In other words, we're living under oppression. We're not allowed to teach. I'm worried for you because you're such a great teacher of Torah and you built such great communities that the authorities are going to hunt you down and they're going to burn you. What does Rabbi Yossi, what does Rabbi Chanina reply? He says, Rebbe, do I have what is my place in the world to come? So Rabbi Chanina says, well, have you done any action that you think would help you get into the world to come? And Rabbi Chanina replies, yes. Once I put aside money for Purim, and that money became mixed up with tzedakah money, so I distributed all the money to the poor. Says Rabbi Yossi, if so, your portion is like my portion, your fate is like my fate, you have a place in the world to come. And the question is obvious. When Rabbi Chanina greeted Rabbi Yossi, he said to him, I'm worried for your safety because you are constantly teaching Torah and you're building great communities and it's dangerous. So why wasn't that enough to secure him a place in the world to come? Why wasn't his Mesiras Nefesh, the fact that he was willing to put himself in danger to teach Torah and to build communities, why wasn't that enough that Rabbi Chanina has to say, have you done anything? And he talks about tzedakah. Why wasn't his great teaching of Torah under duress, under oppression, under the threat of death, why wasn't that enough? Says Rabbi Zoltz the following, that when people are forced into a corner, they sometimes find almost superhuman strength that they didn't know they possessed. When there's no way out, you fight like you've never fought before. That is why the Rambam says that when the Jewish army places a siege around a city, they need to place a siege only on 3 sides. Why? You think 4 sides. You want a siege, do 4 sides so nobody can escape. Says the Rambam, because if you give them no hope of escape, then they will fight and they will find superhuman strength. And the few can beat the many. Therefore, leave one flank open, because if they're given a chance to escape, they'll always go for that chance. But if you force them into a corner, they'll fight like madmen. And that's the idea here, says Rishon. When we're forced into a corner, then we see people who suddenly have superhuman strength and we don't know how they can do it. And we don't know whether we could do it. They're in such a corner, such sorrows, and yet they have such huge. Says Rishon, yes, because there is such an idea. The question is, when they're out of that corner, when they return home, when the pressure is off, when you get back to the humdrum of everyday life, do you still have that strength? And therefore, when faced with an Akedah, an impossible test of taking his son and offering it up to God, maybe Avraham Avinu could have superhuman strength. But how would it be in the rather mundane case of having to buy a field for his wife to bury his wife? Would he have the same strength? Would he have that same superhuman strength? or is it only when he's forced into a corner? That's why, says Reb Shalti, after the ninth tenth of the Akedah, which was the most difficult, we need one more. Can Avram Avinu translate and transfer that superhuman strength when he's forced into a corner, into a situation of everyday life where things are just humdrum and normal and regular? Can he still have that power to stick with God and to realize that God's on his side? And that's why he had the extra test of having to buy a field for Sarah. It's a beautiful idea. And it's an idea which we find very similar in Parshas Vayetze. In Parshas Vayetze, Reuven, the firstborn of Leah, goes out and he finds these dudoim. He finds these flowers that have fertility powers, and he brings them back. And Rachel, who at this stage doesn't have any children, wants to Reuven to give her these dudoim, these plants that have fertility powers. And Leah says to her, it's not bad enough. Leah says to Rachel, it's not bad enough that you've stolen my husband. You now want to steal my dudoim as well. And Leah and Rachel keeps quiet. And the Pasuk says, Vayskar Kimas Rachel, God remembers Rachel. Vayshma'ei Leah, and he hears her, listens to her. Vayiftach es Rachman, he opens her womb and she has children. Says Rashi, she has children in the merit of the chesed that she did, excuse me, when she gave the signs to Leah, when her father switched, when Lavan switched them, she gave the signs in order that Leah wouldn't be embarrassed. Now Hashem is remembering that, and she has children. And Rav Moshe Chevroni Zitzal asks, I understand, why is Hashem remembering her act of chesed now when it happened many years prior? Now we're talking about the Dudoim. The Dudoim happened many years after Leah married Yaakov, and Rachel gave her the signs. And only many years later, with this whole incident with the Dudoim, is Hashem remembering and rewarding Rachel. Why is that? Says Rav Moshe Chevroni, the same idea, that everybody can rise up as a one-off to have superhuman strength. And therefore, when faced with the unimaginable that her sister was going to go under the chuppah, and when Yaakov finds out that it's Leah, he won't go through with the marriage, and Leah will be embarrassed forevermore. Rachel does something unprecedented. It gives her the signs. In other words, gave away her husband, and as far as she knew, she wasn't going to be the mother of any of the 12 tribes. But as a one-off, when she's forced into the corner, it's a dear sister's whole life at stake. Rachel can rise to the challenge. But would she be able to keep that up? Would she be able to take that power with her? Years later, when Leah turns around and says to her, it's not bad enough you stole my husband, you want to steal the dudoim as well? Now she has a chance to say, what do you mean steal your husband? It wasn't for me. You wouldn't have a husband at all. And if that's your attitude, I regret doing it. She has the ability to say that, but she keeps quiet. She proves that that wasn't a one-off. It proves that the power that she had when forced into a corner was she took with her into her everyday life. And at that moment, Hashem says, oh, now you deserve reward. Because in the moment, many, many people can sacrifice their lives for Kiddush Hashem. In the moment, many, many people can do great things. Can they do it again and again and again in their everyday life? We see from Avram Avinu, yes, that even after the Akedah, he managed to do it when he's in the mundane purchase of a field to bury his wife. And we see it, yes, with Rachel Imenu, who, when challenged again, keeps quiet to prove that it wasn't a one-off. And that's the idea. The idea is, and the idea of Rebbe Elazar ben Trajan being told by Reb Chanina that if you've done something in the mundane, ironically, sometimes it's the mundane, small acts that we do, of which perhaps nobody is aware, that's going to get us Odom Haba. And the more, what we would say, great and unprecedented acts may not necessarily guarantee, because that's a moment when everybody can rise to the top. Excuse me. Verse 9. Vayitzin li. Yeah, Abraham Avinu says, "Vayitzin li." So Ephron, give me es ma'aras Machpelah, the ma'arat Machpelah, Asher lo, which is his, Asher b'ksei sodeh, which is at the end of his field, bekesef mole yitnenoli. I'll pay full price. Nachuzas kover. So a few questions. Number one, Avram starts off by saying, "Give it to me," and then immediately he says, "I'll pay for it." Well, what do you want to do? Do you want it as a gift, or do you want to pay for it? Number one. Number two, it says initially Ephron offers the field as a gift. In verse 11, no, my lord, heed me. I have given the field to you, and as for the cave that is in it, I have given it to you. So Ephron also starts off talking about giving it, and we know at the end of the story, he charges him 400 shekel, which is a fortune. So number one, why is Avram saying, give it to me as a gift, and then immediately offering to pay? Number two, why does Ephron say, I'll give it to you a gift, and then charge him a fortune? And then number three, at the end of the transaction, it says, Vayokom hasodeh, v'hama'ora shabola Avram, the cave and the field became Avram's, v'achuzas kova, as a burial, me'es b'nei ches, from the children of the sons of Ches, from the sons of Chet. But it wasn't, it was from Ephron. The Bnei Ches didn't sell it, it was Ephron who sold it. So three questions. Number one, why does Avram start off talking about a gift, then offer to pay? Number two, why does Ephron talk about a gift and then charge a fortune? And number three, why are we told that it became Avram's from Bnei Ches when it was Ephron? And again, everything has to make sense in the Torah. So this seesaw doesn't seem to make sense. So Avram Yosef Auerbach suggests the following. Avram Avinu was worried that even after he had concluded the transaction, the neighbors of Ephron, the Bnei Ches, could challenge. Why? Because there's something called Dinah Debar Meitza. Dinah Debar Meitza means that when I'm selling a field, when I'm selling property, I have to offer it first to my immediate neighbors. And therefore, Avram Avinu was worried. If I buy this field without Ephron first, the field and the cave in the field, without first offering to his immediate neighbors, the Bnei Ches, they could challenge the validity of the sale. It says Avram, there's only two occasions when halachically we do not have to offer our neighbors first choice of the field. Number one is if I'm getting it as a gift. The owner of a field can gift it to anybody. It doesn't have to gift it to his neighbors. Or if the person who's buying it is being charged over and above the accepted rate, then it's such a good deal, I don't have to offer it to my neighbors first. So therefore, Avram Avinu says to Ephron, give me the field, because that would avoid the problem of having to offer it to the neighbors. And if you don't want to give it to me, let me buy it for over the going rate, because that also means that's why Avram Avinu changes in one sentence from gift to giving, because he was giving Ephron two options: gift it to me, that avoids the neighbors, or sell it to me expensively, that avoids the neighbors. Ephron initially replies, "I'll gift it to you," but he didn't mean it, because what does he say in verse? He says here, in verse 11, he says to him, no, my lord, heed me. I have given you the field. As for the cave that is in it, I have given it to you. In the view of the children of my people, I have given it to you. What does that mean? In the view of the people of my people, the children of my people, I have given it to you. You know what Ephron is saying? In their eyes, in my neighbor's eyes, let's conclude that I've given it to you. And then I'll sell it to you for the regular price. In order to get out of the problem of Dinah Debar Meitza, of offering it to my neighbors, I will gift it to you in their eyes. They will think that I've given it to you, and then you can buy it off me. Avram Avinu was having none of it. Avram Avinu didn't want to be part of some kind of swindle, some kind of cheating the people. And therefore Avram immediately answers that I'm going to pay you. In verse 13, he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the members of the council, so that everybody could hear. Rather, if only you would heed me, I will give you the price of the field. So that's why, if we just read what's going on in English, it seems to be going backwards and forwards. He says, gift, give it to you, gift, give it to you, I'll give you money. What's going on here is that there's a to and fro between Avram Avinu. It's so beautiful. Aaron Yosef Auerbach explains. Avram Avinu wants to make sure that this is going to be a valid sale or a valid transaction. And therefore he wants to avoid the neighbors. And therefore he says, give it to me or sell it to me. Ephron implies, I'll sell it to you in their eyes, meaning that I'll give it to you in their eyes, meaning they'll think that I've given it to you, but then I'll sell it to you. Says Avram Avinu, no. If you want to do a trick, I'd rather pay good money for it, because that also avoids having to offer it to the having to offer it to the neighbors. And then Ephron says, if that's the case, 400 shekel, a ridiculous amount. And therefore, that's what's going on here. The to and fro follows the idea that in order for it to be a valid sale, we have to ensure that either it's a gift or he's paid a lot of money. And that's why at the end, he pays 400 shekel over nesocher, which means 400 good shekels. They're accepted by everybody. And it says that the cave becomes Avram's from Bnei Ches. Why? Because the neighbors did not have a claim over it. Excuse me, I've got hiccups. Did not have the claim over it. Why did they not have the claim over it? Because everything was, he paid a fortune more than he should have. Okay. That's just so that we can, when you read it, you can follow exactly what's going on. Let's finish with an idea I've said before, which I heard from Rabbi Shlomo Kimchi at my nephew's wedding. And that is, the Gemara in Kedushin learns out that why do we give under the chuppah? Why do we give the bride a ring? Because and the rabbi asks, is it worth a pruta? Because one of the ways in Jewish law that we affect Kedushin is by giving something of value to the wife, to the bride. And where do we learn this from? We learn it from the transaction of Ephron and Avram Avinu giving them when he bought the field. Here it says the word kach. There by marriage it says the word kach. We compare the two. And Rabbi Kimchi asks a beautiful question. It seems to be a very mundane way to learn out marriage. There's no love here. We're not talking about that. We learn Avram bought a field, and therefore that's the way that we affect marriage because of the same words, and we give the wife something of value, and she agrees to be married. Where's the romance? Where's love? It just seems to be a transaction. What do we learn from the fact that we learn out the laws of marriage from this monetary transaction? So he said something so beautiful, and that is, let's look at Ephron after the deal. When Ephron walked away, you can bet that he was fantastically happy. He'd done the deal of his life. 400 shekel for a rocky field with some cave in it that you could only use for burial. I've done the deal of my life. It was unbelievable. But now let's look at Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu walks away, a burial place for Sarah, the Machpelah with Adam and Chava, where I'm going to be buried, where Yitzchak and Rivka are going to be buried, where Yaakov and Leah are going to be buried. This was the deal of my life. 400 shekel is nothing for the eternity of Ma'arat Machpelah and what it means to the Jewish people. And therefore, both sides were ecstatic. They thought they got the best deal in the world. He says that's what marriage has to be. When the bride and the groom stand under the chuppah, the chosen has to think he is getting the best girl in the world. He can't believe his luck. He's able to marry this girl. And when she stands under the chuppah, she can't believe her luck that she's getting such a wonderful chosen. That's the message from the Ma'arat Machpelah and marriage. Ma'arat Machpelah, they both could not believe the luck. They can't believe they had the best deal in the world, Avram and Ephraim. So too, the chosen and Kala, we say to them, you should, rest of your life, live with the realization that both of you have got the best deal in your life. We'll leave it there. Have a great week. I'm sorry about my hiccups at the end. And let's hit the service. We'll see you next week, please God. Bye.